What's going on, dudes? Nick here, or RGA Gaming, and welcome to Coffee and Coding, a brand new series where I'm going to teach you guys everything you need to know about coding Minecraft plugins. The most important step when starting is to have your coffee. It wouldn't be coffee and coding if you didn't have coffee. If you don't know, coffee is a requirement of pretty much any type of development work. Oh, that's delicious, delicious fuel. I know this is probably long-winded and long. I know a lot of you here are probably like, I just wanted to see how to make a plugin. Why'd you have to be so long? Well, I want to show you the way to do it. Because if I don't explain things, if I just say type this, do this, do that, you'd be like, okay. And then you're gonna go do it next time, be like, the first thing you're gonna want to do is download an editor. Now, I use Eclipse because I've only ever used Eclipse, and I like the program. It's really easy to use. I'm not gonna show you how to download that. I'm sure you can Google Eclipse download. So I've already skipped ahead. We are in the program here. This is the program IDE. This is what it looks like when you first launch it. It's gonna have a little welcome screen. Actually, when you first launch it, it's gonna ask you what workspace you wanna work in. For example, a workspace is just like a collection of projects. So let's say you work for two different Minecraft servers and they each had their own sets of plugins, and you could have a workspace for company A and a workspace for company B. Or maybe you have a personal workspace and a business workspace, or you do other types of Java projects. Well, no matter what it is, a workspace is just like a collection of projects. The actual code files are stored, well, wherever you really want them to be, but it's a collection of projects. So for me, I just created this brand new one for tutorial's sake so you guys can see everything, but this is what you will see when you first launch the program. For me, I just close this. This panel over here is the outline panel. I don't like that one, so I get rid of that. And this one here is way too wide for me, so I'm gonna drag it over to about here. And same thing with this one, I drag it down a little bit. Now you can move these however you want. This is just kind of like how I like to keep the space, because all your code will be in the center here. So this is where you're going to be editing your files and stuff. So of course you want to have the most space there. So it's time. We're going to do our first tutorial. This is going to be probably one of the most basic tutorials, but also one of the most important. Because if you don't have this, the base to creating a brand new project, then you won't be able to make a project. Like, sure, anyone that knows Java code can write Java code, you can read the API, but if you don't know these little tiny details, like these are the things that when I first started, I spent hours trying to figure out all these little stupid things of like, oh, well, how do you do this? How do you do that? How do you do this? And why isn't this working? Why isn't that working? Well, I'm here to show you the basics. So there's not really gonna be too much coding in this program. Other than just the basics, but hey, this is the basics that I go through every time I create a brand new project. So first of all, we need to create the project. And we're not gonna create a Java project, even though it's technically a Java project, we're gonna be using Maven. Now, I don't really know exactly what Maven is. I really don't, because I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. I know how to create Maven projects, and I'm sure there's someone in the comments that's gonna tell me. If you do wanna tell me, then that is absolutely fine, which also actually brings up rule number 2. Rule number 1 of coffee and coding is have your coffee ready. Rule number 2 is going to be to keep your opinion to yourself. Opinions are like butts. Everybody has one. Some stink, some don't, some are in between. But at the end of the day, I have mine. I have my own. I don't need yours. Now, there's a difference between an opinion and a fact. For instance, I didn't go to school to learn how to code. I've spent years and years and years of my life learning stuff on my own, which means I might say something wrong. I might say, oh, you use this variable and this is an instantiator, and someone else might be like, that's not an instantiator, that's an initializer, or something like that. And you know, that kind of stuff I'm all for. I want to learn, I want to advance, and that stuff's great. But the people that are like, oh, well, you shouldn't do it this way, you should do it this way, or even worse, like, well, you know, that first letter you have capitalized, but the standard is to have it lowercase and then the next one capitalized. Like, I don't care about that, okay? I've spent years creating what I do. My stuff works for me. Your stuff works for you. Just because a teacher told you somewhere along the line that, well, you really should do it this way, I don't care. Like, that's just kind of stuff that drives me crazy. Now, we'll get a little bit more into that stuff as we talk a little bit more about troubleshooting, but troubleshooting on its own can be a whole fun project. But anyways, back to creating the project. What we're going to do is we're going to create a project. Now, I know we said we're coding in Java, so you'd think, oh, let's just create a Java project. We're not creating a Java project. A Java project is something that you'd want to run in the Java framework. Technically, we're creating a plugin for Minecraft, so it's still Java, but I'm going to actually use a different type of package. So when I click the Create a Project button, or if you don't see this here, you just go to File, new, and you click on project, not Java project. So you go to new project, and we're gonna be using Maven. Now, Maven's something I've been using for a decade, and honestly, I can't tell you what it is. From what I've gathered, it's a easy way to like package your code into a way that you can share with others and allows them to pull it into their IDEs without having to like either remap paths as much, or there's some benefit to it. It's like packaging them together. Now, if someone would like to explain that to me, I would appreciate it. Again, I don't need to understand it. It really doesn't affect what I do. I've been coding for many years with it, and I've never needed to know what it is. I just need to know how to use it. So once you have the Maven project selected, hit next, and this is where we're gonna be naming our project. So the first thing you're gonna wanna do is check this little box here that says create a simple project. So by default, it has the use default workspace location selected, which means all your projects and files are gonna be stored inside of that. Now, if you wanted to store your files in a separate location, then you could easily do that. You could uncheck this, and you could go and find the folder that you want to use. For me, I'm just gonna use this here. I know where it's at, I know how to access it, and I can back it up from its current location. So that works for me. And now we are here. There's really only two things that you need to fill out in this thing that aren't pre-populated. The first one is your group ID. So if you have a website that you use, you can easily use that. I mean, this really doesn't, you don't have to own the website. You could just put like test.icles if you want, but like that would be kind of inappropriate if you ever had to share this with someone. It's kind of a way to identify and package your project. So for me, I just use com.rga Minecraft because I own rgaminecraft.com. And we're gonna call this .tutorials and then .1. Now technically you could put tutorial 1, or you could put tutorials.tutorial1. I mean, it's whatever you want it to be. You know, maybe we'll do this one if it makes you feel better. How about we do that? So we're gonna name this one here, tutorial 1. So whatever you put in the artifact ID is gonna be what your project is named. It's gonna generate a jar file with that name. So this is kind of like the workspace you're working in, and this is kind of like the name of the project. Now this here is the version. So you can change this later on. Obviously, as you update your code, you can change it to whatever you want. I personally prefer typing like v-1.0.0. Whoop, that's 9.9. So this is like version 1.0.0. You could do version 1. You could just, 1 through a million. This is one of those things when it comes to versions that the idea behind it is the dots separate like miniature and major changes to the program. So let's say you had to fix a small bug. This would go to 101, 102, 103. And maybe let's say you get to a point where you're like, well, we had that logging class, but we want to go from file logging to database logging. And that's a pretty big change. So maybe you go to version 1.1.0 because now when you know it's and now you know that as long as it's 1.1 or higher, it's got the database driven logging. And then obviously you can fix your bugs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you just decide that, hey, I want to redo a lot of this. I'm not happy with it. I like all the existing code. It's going to do the exact same stuff, but I've learned a lot over the years and I want to redo this. So then you go to version 2.0. Now you don't have to do any of this. You could keep it at version 1.0.0 forever and just constantly change it and update the same version. And it'll work just fine. The reason you do this is so that later down the road, if you have 20 different servers running, then you know that they're all on the same version. Just because it says 1.0.0, if you've never changed the version number, then this one's 1.0.0 is not the same as this one's 1.0.0. And that's really it. So that's really it. You change the version. You don't have to. You can just leave it exactly how it is, and packaging is jar. So once you're done with that, you hit finish, and your project is created. It'll show up on the left-hand side here. And you can see we now have a tutorial 1 folder over here. There's a few things that we can do, but the first thing I want to show you is the pom.xml. And if you open this guy up, it's going to say the name of your group ID here, and it's going to have the artifact ID here. If you change the artifact ID here, it will change what it exports as. If you change the version here to 2.0.1, because obviously I changed it to 2.0.0, but really this is still 1.0.0. So we're going to change that back to 1.0.0, and now it's going to export as version 1.0.0. But now we're going to go ahead and get started with our code. So this is your Java code folder here, and what we're going to do is we're just going to create a new package. Now, years ago, I had somebody tell me, like, why do you create so many packages for everything? I use packages for grouping different types of code that do different things. So For example, this one is called tutorial 1, so this is going to be called tutorial 1, and that's just going to be the tutorial 1 package. So this is going to be where we create our main class. So we're just going to create a new class, and we're going to call it main. We've unchecked those guys and hit finish. And now we have our main.java class. So now, since we're working with Minecraft, we actually have to know, well, what are the Minecraft things? By default, Java has no idea what the hell Minecraft is. So if we try to do anything Minecraft related, like find a block, so like if we try to type block, it's gonna say, well, I don't see a block. And you're like, well, I know Minecraft has blocks, that's what the whole game's about. It's because we don't have the API in here to tell it what it is. An API is basically a way that a developer can take what they have and open it up for other people to use. So normally in coding, nothing is defined. Like obviously right now I'm trying to say, well, I want a block, like a diamond block, a gold block, whatever it might be, it's a block. But by default, there is no such thing as a block in Java code. So you have to define what a block is. Well, if we had to define what every block was in Minecraft and all the attributes of that block, like what tools can break it, how long does it take to break that stuff, like we would have to know all that, and then we'd have to write all the code to do that. So an API kind of lets someone else do that code for you, and then you just use that block. So for example, when we include the API for Minecraft, we say block, and it knows that, oh, you're talking about an actual block in the game. Well, here's all the attributes. Here's its X, Y, Z location, here's the type, here's its state, all kinds of information about it without you actually having to know any of that stuff. So they write all that code, and then you call their code, which then handles all the interactions and other stuff that you want to do with it. Now that's really a confusing way to try to describe an API. I guess a better example would be you go to the ice cream store and you say, hey, I want a waffle cone with some vanilla and rainbow sprinkles. Now, if you didn't go to the ice cream store, you'd have to say, okay, well, I still want my ice cream in a waffle cone, vanilla ice cream with rainbow sprinkles. Well, how do you make a waffle cone? What is a waffle cone? How do you make it? What is ice cream? How do you make it? What is what are rainbow sprinkles? How do you make them? How many colors are there? You know, how do you decide all this stuff? If you had to know all that, you'd never be able to get your ice cream because there'd be too many pieces in between. Or maybe you could. Maybe you put it all together and be like, well, sprinkles are like sugar that are coated with color. So now I need some sugar and color. And maybe if we make like rock candy, we can make our own little crushed up rock candy. That'll be our sprinkles. Ice cream is cream that's iced. So sure, let's get some heavy cream and like try to stir it around and freeze it. Cool, you've got your ice cream. And then, you know, so on. So then you end up making your own version of ice cream. You make a waffle, flatten it out, and sure, you've got an ice cream cone with sprinkles, but it's not gonna taste right. And if you try to give it to someone else or sell it, they'll be like, this isn't right. And it's because you've made your own version. So an API is basically what the ice cream shop does. They say, hey, don't worry about how to make the ice cream, how to make the cone, how to make the sprinkles. We've got that. Just tell us what you want and we'll handle everything else and we'll give you what you want. So that's kind of a better way of explaining an API and why it's important. So what we have to do is we have to actually go and tell it where our API is. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the project up here, right click on it, go to properties, go to Java build path, click on libraries, add external jar, and what we're going to do is I'm going to select the spigot 117 jar, only because my spigot 118 jar isn't the actual full jar. So I'm going to select the 117 one and hit apply and close. Now we can go to reference libraries here and see that spigot 117.1 is loaded. So if we were to go back into our, just create our void A again, which won't be called by anything. We're just doing this to define a block. But here we go. We've got a block, and if we hold control and hit space, we can see, look at this, org.bukkit.block. We now have the block class. So before, we tried to define what a block was, and we couldn't because it doesn't know what a block is. But now that we're using that API, this block vendor now knows what a block is. So you don't have to worry about what a block is, you already know. So we're just gonna call it block B. So how this works is this little B here is the block, and this is the type. So we're defining a variable called B that is the type of a block. Now, types are definitely important when it comes to working with projects. So everything in Java kind of has a base class of an object. So if we want to define an object, meaning we don't know what it is, but we want to create a variable to hold that object, we could technically do this. We could go object O, and now we have an object. Now technically, if we just say O equals B, it's gonna have a little squiggly line under the B because it's not initialized. So we have to actually initialize this. It's too hard to create a block, so what we're gonna do is just equal to null. So now it is initialized. Okay, so even though it's null, it's empty, it's still been initialized. Initializing something we'll cover later. But now we have an object, a block B, we have an object O, and then we set O equal to B. Even though B is a block type and O is like the very base type, we now have O equal to B, which probably makes no sense to you. If you're reading this code, you'd be like, well, what the hell is O? What is B? I don't know what that stands for. So this is when naming comes in very handy. So for me, what I would do is for this block, I would put, because it's an object, so I put an O in front of most things. So I would call it O block. So it's a block object. So it's an object that's a block. An object is like the base class in Java, so I'd put O block. Some people might want to call it a block, so they'll call it block 1, you know, because it's block number 1. Maybe you have 3 blocks, block 1, block 2, block 3. So they want to actually have the word block in there. Or you could put B, so B1. Well, B could be Boolean, it could be block, it could be anything else that starts with a B. So maybe you put BLK, really whatever you want to name it. It's going to make no difference to the compiler what you call it. If someone's reading your code that doesn't know what this is, they're going to say BLK1. Okay, I don't know what that is. So if you call it O block, it's a block object. It's just a generic block object. We don't know what it is, we don't know what we're doing with it, and since we don't know what we're doing with it yet, a generic name like that would work. We've got our object O, so we just call it O object. So now we have to go fix our code down here by putting O object equals O block. Or maybe we want to call this O block object. How about that? So now we call it O block object, and we have our block, which is null, being set into the block object. That sounds very complicated. It kind of is, but it's really not. Basically, all we did was we created a block, a Minecraft block, and then we created a generic type that says, I don't know what I am, but I'm going to be equal to that guy. And it is. So now you've got the block, and you've got something that says, hey, I am going to carry that guy. I'm going to be that guy. I want to be him. I don't know what he is. So now, technically, we have 2 objects that we can work with. We've got the block and the object block. Now, the difference is if we type O block dot, these are all the methods that you can call. These are all the functions that you can call to do different things. So you could get the biome of it. You could get, if it's powered, you can get the chunk that block is in. You can get light level from the sky. You can get X, Y, and Z coordinates. Is it a liquid? Is it empty? Is it passable? I mean, all kinds of things from that. So you could just say .get biome. The object type, on the other hand, where it's just the base object. So if we type O block object dot, you can see there's nothing there because the base object only has these functions or routines that it can call, and that's it. So I know you're probably thinking like, well, RGA, what if? I know you're probably thinking like, well, but didn't you set it equal to the block? So doesn't it technically say, hey, I'm going to be whatever that guy is? Technically, yes, but you have to tell your code that that block object is a block. So one way to do that is by going in front of it and putting a parenthesis block. So it's got a squiggly line there because we just have to put a semicolon on the back end. And also we have to wrap this whole thing with parentheses. And then now, if we put the period at the end, you can see that we've got all the same stuff. We've got the chunk, we've got the data, we've got the light level, X, Y, and Z from the block object. So we could just do the same thing. We could do .get, we just call it get biome here. So doing the exact same thing, except the only difference is this one here, the block object, doesn't know what it is. It just says, I'm an object, I've got some value, but I don't know what I am and I don't know what I can do. And what we're doing here is when you put parentheses around the word block, it's casting, which is a great way of saying like converting, but it's casting that block object to a block. It says, hey, block object, I'm gonna make you into this block type. So now you're a block type. And then suddenly once it becomes a block type, it's like, oh, well, I'm a block type. Here's everything I can do. Because the object itself says, I'm just an object, I'm dumb, I don't have anything to do. When you cast it, you put this guy in front of it to tell it what it's gonna become. And then you put the parentheses around it to actually create the whole object. Now you can get to all that stuff. Now that's probably hard to visualize because you probably don't know what a block is. You don't know a lot of this stuff. So we could kind of do the same thing here. And we could just do int x equals 1. And then we're gonna say object z equals x. And that works. But if we were to try to add x and z together, if we said z equals z plus x, it's gonna say, I don't know how to add this together. I know that x is an integer, but I don't know what I am. I don't know how you add 1 to whatever I am. So in this case, since we're not accessing any methods from it, all we'd have to do is put int in front of here. So you see it says cannot cast object to int. And that's because we can't use int, we have to use the word integer. It's base types versus class types. It's hard to understand, but it's basically the same thing as int. It's just something that actually knows how to take something that's unknown and convert it to an integer base type. So now, technically z will equal 2 because we're setting z equal to 1, and then we're adding 1 to z. But you can see, without this cast, it says, I have no idea what I am, and you're trying to tell me to add 1 to me. I could be the color red. How the hell do you add 1 to the color red? So by putting integer in front of it, it knows, oh, well, I'm an integer, I'm a number. Let me add 1 to that. Yeah, I can do that, that's easy. So I don't even know how we got on this topic. I think it's because we started with the block type. But I would say this is a long-winded way of saying we now have access to the API. I can guarantee there's a lot of people in the comments right now being like, oh my God, I just wanted to see how you get your first project going. Well, let's go ahead and finish that up for you. So what we're gonna do is so for those of you who want to know how to actually start coding, what we're gonna do is we're gonna, after the word main, put a space and put extends, and then Java plugin. Now, if you hold Control and hit space, it should automatically import this for you. Now, technically you could type import and then the actual namespace of what you're looking for, but Control space brings up a lot of the different options that you have access to. Now, in order to get your plugin actually working, we're gonna need to do a couple things here. We need to put @override, and if you hold Control and hit space, it'll let you complete that. But we have to override, there's 2 routines. There is the on-enable and the on-disable. Those are the things that tell your plugin, hey, when I turn on, do this, when I turn off, do this. So what we have to do is put in a public void on-enable and @override public void on-disable. And now we have our code to start our project and end it. This gets called automatically by the spigot version that you're running, or the bukkit version, or whatever server version you're running. Will call this on enable when it's starting up, and it will call on disable when it's shutting down. Now, one other thing that I do is you sometimes will need a reference to your base plugin, like this plugin that we're writing. So what I do is I create a public static Java plugin, and I just call it O plugin. Again, you can name it whatever you want. It really doesn't matter. But I create that static reference to the plugin, and I set it to null. And in the on enable, I say O plugin equals this. Now, this will come in handy in future tutorials, but for now, we're just gonna do this. On enable this, on disable, we're gonna set this equal to null. And now we have a plugin that will start up and do this and shut down and do this. Now, we wanna test this, right? We wanna make sure it works. So what we'll do is we'll say bukkit.get logger.log, and we could do level.info, Or if you wanted to log anything else, you can do find, finer, finest. This is just info. This is just built-in stuff for theirs. And we're gonna put the string here. We're gonna say starting up, ... I'm gonna copy this and paste it below here and say startup complete. And then I'm gonna do the same thing. We're gonna say copy these two here, and we're gonna say instead of starting up, it's gonna say shutting down ... and we're gonna say shutdown complete. So now when the plugin turns on, it's gonna say starting up. It's gonna set this variable equal to itself and say startup complete. Now eventually we'll get more stuff in here, but this is just the very basics of getting a plugin going. And on disable, we are shutting down our plugin. So we're gonna clear our reference and we're going to say shutdown complete. So you'll be able to see this stuff in console. Now, here's the last step that will drive some of you guys crazy, and you'll spend hours and hours and hours trying to figure out why your plugin won't work. You'll upload it and nothing will happen. It's not gonna run, you're not gonna see anything, and you're gonna be swearing, trying to figure out what's going on. It's because we're missing one file, the plugin.yml file, that tells Spigot, hey, here's my entry point. Because basically if you just upload the jar, it's like, okay, I don't know, you don't tell me where to go. What do I do with you? I don't know what you are. So we need to create a file that says, hey, here's what I am, here's how to run me. So we go right click on the source main resources, go to new, and we're gonna go to file, and we're gonna type the file name as plugin.yml. Now there are permissions and commands and stuff that we can register in here. For this, we're not gonna have any of that because we don't have a need for it yet. Now as you can see, mine opened up with Notepad++. It's gonna ask you which IDE you wanna edit them with. When it comes to editing YML files, I like to use something that kind of formats them properly, so I use Notepad++ here. But regardless of what you use, even if you use the built-in one here and edit inside here, you can still do that. I just use this because it's what works for me. Now, we're gonna need a couple things in here to get your plugin working, so we're gonna put name tutorial1, because that's the name of our plugin. Next, we need to type the word main, because it needs to know where your main class is. So you can see it's in the tutorial1 package, and it's called main with a capital M. So what we have to do is tell it that. So tutorial1.main. Now, if you wanted to call this main1 and rename that to main1, well, you could do that. You just have to go back in here and tell it your main class is actually called main1. It doesn't have to be main. I just use main because, well, why not? It works for me. But do whatever you want, name it whatever you want. I'm sure someone's gonna disagree in the comments, but hey, it's worked for me forever, so I'm not gonna change it. But that's almost it. What we're gonna do is we're gonna put version 1.0.0, and then we're gonna type API-version 1.17. So now this tells it that you're using the 1.17 API. If you don't put the API version, it's gonna start up and it's gonna default you to 1.12. Even if you're using and referencing the 1.17 jar, it's gonna default to 1.12. Because 1.13 and up is completely different than 1.12. There's tons of new blocks, and in order to access those new blocks, you have to tell it specifically that you're using that version of the API. So whatever version you're using, you set the API version of that. If you are coding for 1.12, then set it to API version 1.12. But that's it. Now, we have our plugin.yml, which contains the name, space, the name of the project, the main, which is where the main routine is, which again is our tutorial1.main, and our plugin.yml, and our version 1.00, and our API version 1.17. That's it. We can close this. And our plugin is now ready to build and get installed. Now, building the project is simple. You right click on it, go to run as, and you go to Maven install. It's gonna compile and it's gonna throw an error. Oh man, build failure. That's not good. It's actually simple, you just have to run it again. Watch this. But you didn't change anything. Build success. What the heck? What happened? That's really strange. It's because I don't know why. I don't know why it does it, but you do have to do that. Anytime you change your project, like if we were to make a big change, like add another class, and we just call this class 2, we're gonna run as install, and it's gonna error out. Look at it's errored out again. Build failure. What the heck? We didn't change anything. The code's fine. Well, what if we just run it again? Maven install. Look at this. Build success. It does that. Anytime you add a new class, it does that. And I think it's got something to do with how it builds. It's like it has a new file, so it tries to build it, and it's like, hey, well, that new file is not there. I'm going to error out for some reason. Then when you run it again, it's like, oh, well, last time I created that file, so now it's there. Now that's in my mind what it's doing. I don't think it's that simple. I think there's more to it. But if we go ahead and delete this class, you know, even though we're back to a build that already ran before, guess what? We changed it. We added a class. Build failure. I cannot tell you why it does this. I wish I knew. I guess I really don't wish I knew, because it really doesn't matter. All you have to do is run it again and look at this build success. Now, it tells you where it's at. So if we were to go to this folder here, tutorial1.jar. So if we took that, put it on our Minecraft server, put it in the plugins folder, and started the server, it's going to run. As long as you're running, if you're running the default Minecraft server, it's not going to work. You have to be running Spigot in order to do this, or some version of Spigot. But yeah, you just literally paste that into your server folder, and it will now work. And that's it. So we've created our first tutorial. So by me taking a little bit more time and explaining to you the basics of not just what we're doing, but why, you'll kind of understand why we're doing it. So the next time you do it, you'll be like, oh, that's right. Yeah, we're doing this because we have to do this. And it's not working because, oh, well, I don't have that file telling it who that is. So sure, it's long-winded, but that's the point of this series. If you don't like it, then I wouldn't suggest watching the rest of them, because they're going to be probably just as crazy. I want to teach. I want you to learn. I don't want to just show you. I want you guys to actually understand what we're doing and why. I mean, the whole reason I went through that whole variable thing wasn't because I expect you to instantly understand variables, but in the next video, when I start doing some of that stuff, then you'll understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. Maybe you don't understand how it works, but you'll at least understand the basics. So that's why I'm trying to show you some of this stuff now. And yeah, that's all for the first tutorial. This now lets you do whatever you want in the plugin. If this is all you're here for and you don't give a crap about anything else that we're doing, thanks for watching. If you did have fun and enjoy this video and want to see more of this stuff, smash the like button. Or don't smash it, just poke it, press it, do whatever you want. As long as you hit the like button. If you hit the dislike button, at least leave a comment telling me what you didn't like, so I can try to make it better in the future for other people. But thanks for watching, everybody. Happy New Year. I'm going to try to continue this as long as I can. We'll hit some kind of a like goal. What kind of a like goal can we hit for this? Let's say it's 10 likes. If we get 10 likes on this video, I'll do a part 2. And speaking of that, leave a comment with what you think we should do in our part 2 of the tutorial. Could be anything. Leave in the comments. See you guys next time. Goodbye.